The first gunshot echoed through Redemption Creek like thunder on a clear day, stopping Dahlia Summers dead in her tracks. The second shot made the townspeople scatter like frightened birds, but their fearful eyes weren't fixed on the pistol-wielding drunk outside the saloon. They were locked on her. It was 1876 in the Arizona Territory, and Dahlia Summers had just arrived in a town that already seemed to know her name and, worse, her reputation. "It's her," someone whispered as Dahlia stepped down from the stagecoach, dust coating her threadbare blue dress. "The cursed woman from Silver Pine." Dahlia clutched her small carpetbag tighter, her knuckles whitening. 22 years of life had taught her that whispers spread faster than wildfire and burned twice as hot. She kept her chin up, green eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the murmurs that followed her like shadows. "They say every town she visits suffers drought," a woman hissed to her companion. "Crops wither, wells run dry." "I heard it's worse," replied another. 3 men who courted her died within a year, one by lightning, one by snake, one by his own hand. Dahlia had heard it all before. The rumors had started after her parents died of fever when she was 16, leaving her alone in a world that seemed determined to blame her for every misfortune. A poor harvest, a sudden storm, a mining accident somehow, the quiet girl with the strange green eyes became the cause of it all. She made her way toward the only boarding house in Redemption Creek, ignoring the whispers that trailed in her wake. She needed work, a place to stay, and if she was very lucky, a few months of peace before the rumors caught up with her again. What she didn't need was the attention of the tall cowboy watching her from the hitching post outside the general store. Flynn Winters leaned against the post, one boot crossed over the other, seemingly oblivious to the commotion around him. Unlike the others, his blue eyes held no fear when they met Dahlia's only curiosity. He tipped his hat slightly as she passed, a gesture so casual it might have been meant for anyone. "New in town," he called out, his voice carrying over the diminishing chaos of the gunshots. Dahlia hesitated, then nodded curtly, unwilling to invite conversation. Experience had taught her that friendly faces often turned cold once they learned what followed her. "Sheriff's got that drunk handled," Flynn said, nodding toward the saloon where the town's lawman was now escorting the troublemaker away. "No cause for worry." "I wasn't worried," Dahlia replied, the first words she'd spoken since arriving. Her voice was soft but clear, with a slight rasp that suggested it wasn't often used. Flynn's eyebrows rose slightly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Most newcomers jump at gunshots. I've heard worse." Something in her tone made his smile fade. He studied her more carefully now, taking in the simple dress, the worn carpetbag, the wary set of her shoulders. "Flynn Winters," he said, straightening up and extending a hand. "I run the W ranch just outside town." Dahlia looked at his outstretched hand as if it might bite her. After a moment's hesitation, she shifted her bag and briefly touched his palm with her fingers. "Dahlia Summers." The reaction was immediate. A woman walking by stopped mid-stride, her basket of goods nearly tumbling from her grip. "Summers," she repeated, loud enough for several heads to turn. "The Dahlia Summers." Flynn's expression remained unchanged, though his eyes flickered with interest. "You've got a reputation that precedes you, Miss Summers." "Not one I've earned," she replied, withdrawing her hand and gripping her bag tighter. "Excuse me, I need to secure lodging before dark." As she turned to leave, Flynn called after her, "If you're looking for work, Miss Summers, the W could use a housekeeper. Previous one left to get married last month." Dahlia paused, surprise momentarily replacing the wariness in her eyes. "You'd hire me, knowing my name." Flynn shrugged, a casual gesture that belied the intensity of his gaze. "I judge folks by what they do, not what's said about them." "You might be the only one," Dahlia murmured, before continuing toward the boarding house. Behind her, she heard a woman's urgent whisper to Flynn. "You can't be serious, Winters. That woman's cursed. She'll bring nothing but misfortune to your ranch." Flynn's response carried clearly on the evening air. "Superstitious nonsense, Mrs. Cartwright. Besides, my ranch could use some excitement." Dahlia didn't look back, but for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly. The boarding house was run by a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Tilden, who eyed Dahlia's meager belongings with suspicion, but accepted her money without comment at least until another boarder whispered in her ear. Then the room rate mysteriously doubled. "Supply and demand, Miss Summers," Mrs. Tilden said coolly when Dahlia questioned the change. "Rooms are scarce this time of year." Despite the nearly empty hooks on the key rack behind her, Dahlia didn't argue. She paid the inflated price, took her key, and climbed the narrow stairs to a small room with a slanted ceiling and a view of the dusty Main Street. The bed creaked as she sat down, removing her worn boots with a sigh of relief. Through the thin curtains, she could see the last light of day painting the distant mountains purple and gold. Redemption Creek looked peaceful from up here, nothing like the tense reception she'd received. A soft knock at her door made her start. She opened it cautiously to find a young girl of perhaps 12 or 13, with braided blonde hair and curious eyes. "Ma says to tell you dinner's at 6 sharp," the girl announced, then added in a rushed whisper, "Is it true you can make it rain by crying? Billy Peterson says you made a whole lake dry up in Nevada just by looking at it." "Billy Peterson has a vivid imagination," Dahlia replied wearily. "What's your name?" "Isabel Tilden. Most folks call me Izzy." The girl peered past Dahlia into the sparse room. "How come you travel so light if you're a witch?" "I'm not a witch, Izzy. Just a woman looking for work. The cowboy said you might work for him." "Mr. Winters is nice, but people say his ranch is haunted 'cause his brother died there last year. Maybe that's why he's not scared of you." Izzy tilted her head. "Are you scared of ghosts?" "No," Dahlia said softly. "The living worry me far more." Izzy seemed to consider this profound statement. "Dinner's still at 6, she finally said, before scampering back down the hallway. Dahlia closed the door and leaned against it, exhaustion washing over her. Tomorrow, she would decide whether to take Flynn Winters up on his job offer or continue moving west. For tonight, she just wanted a hot meal and sleep without dreams. But as she washed her face in the chipped basin, she couldn't help but think of the cowboy with the steady gaze who'd offered her work when others could barely stand her presence. She'd met kind people before, but kindness often withered once misfortune struck, and misfortune always seemed to find her eventually. She'd learned long ago not to trust momentary respites from her reputation. They never lasted. Still, as she braided her long chestnut hair for the night, Dahlia found herself wondering about the Double W Ranch and the man who wasn't afraid of a woman called Cursed. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from the boarding house kitchen. Dahlia dressed carefully in her second dress, a faded brown cotton that had once been her mother's. She pinned her hair neatly and headed downstairs, determined to present herself as ordinary and unremarkable as possible. The dining room fell silent as she entered. 5 other boarders, 2 salesmen, an elderly couple, and a young man who appeared to be a clerk stared openly before turning back to their breakfasts with deliberate attention. Mrs. Tilden placed a plate before her without meeting her eyes. "I've decided to accept the position at the Double W," Dahlia announced quietly as the widow turned to leave. "Could you direct me to the ranch?" Mrs. Tilden's thin lips pressed together. 3 miles north of town, follow the creek, can't miss it." She hesitated, then added reluctantly, "Mr. Winters is well respected hereabouts. His brother's death hit him hard. He doesn't need more trouble." "I don't bring trouble, Mrs. Tilden," Dahlia said evenly. "It finds me regardless of what I do or don't do." "HMPH," was the only response as Mrs. Tilden retreated to the kitchen. After breakfast, Dahlia gathered her few possessions and settled her bill. Outside, the morning sun already blazed hot on the dusty street. She was adjusting her small hat when Flynn Winters rode up on a handsome chestnut gelding. "Miss Summers," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "Thought I might save you the walk if you've decided to take the job." Several passers-by stopped to stare at this development. Dahlia could practically see new rumors forming behind their eyes. "Mr. Winters," she acknowledged. "I was just heading to your ranch." A genuine smile lit his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Then it's fortunate timing. He dismounted in one fluid motion and reached for her carpet bag. "May I?" She relinquished it reluctantly. "The walk wouldn't have troubled me." "No doubt," he replied, securing her bag to his saddle. "But 3 miles in this heat seems unnecessary when Storm here can carry us both." He patted the horse's neck affectionately. Dahlia eyed the animal warily. "I don't have much experience with horses." "Storm's gentle as a lamb despite his name." Flynn's blue eyes held a hint of amusement. "Named him during a thunderstorm when he was born. Seemed fitting at the time." Before Dahlia could respond, the general store owner emerged onto his porch, his face dark with concern. "Winters, a word." Flynn sighed. "Excuse me a moment, Miss Summers." He walked over to the older man, who immediately began speaking in urgent, hushed tones, occasionally glancing at Dahlia. She didn't need to hear their conversation to know its content. The warnings had followed her from town to town for years. "She's trouble. Misfortune follows her. Don't get involved." To her surprise, Flynn's response was audible and firm. "That's enough, George. I don't hold with that superstitious nonsense, and neither should you." George lowered his voice again, his expression growing more agitated. Flynn listened for a moment longer before cutting him off with a raised hand. "I appreciate your concern," he said clearly, "but I make my own decisions about who works at my ranch." He returned to Dahlia, who stood straight-backed beside the horse, her face carefully blank. "Ready?" He asked, as if nothing had happened. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I can find work elsewhere." Flynn studied her face. "Running from town to town because people can't separate coincidence from causation doesn't seem like much of a life, Miss Summers." "You don't know anything about my life," she replied, a flash of defiance in her green eyes. "True enough," he conceded, "but I know something about judgment and false accusations." Something darkened in his expression briefly before he continued. "The job offers fair wages, a private room, and 3 meals a day. The work is honest, if not always easy. Are you still interested?" Dahlia glanced around at the townspeople watching their exchange with unconcealed interest. How long before something went wrong and they blamed her? How long before Flynn Winters regretted his decision, yet the alternative was moving on again with dwindling funds and no guarantee the next town would be any different? "Yes," she said finally. "I'm still interested." Flynn nodded, clearly pleased. "Then let's not give the gossips any more to talk about today." He mounted his horse with practiced ease, then extended a hand down to her. "Foot in the stirrup, then push up. I'll do the rest." Dahlia hesitated only briefly before following his instructions. His hand was warm and strong as he pulled her up behind him. She settled awkwardly, unsure where to place her hands. "You'll want to hold on," he advised as the horse shifted beneath them. "Unless you fancy a meeting with the dirt." Reluctantly, she placed her hands lightly on his sides. Flynn chuckled, a sound she felt rather than heard. "That won't do, Miss Summers. Storm has a spirited trot." Before she could respond, he clicked his tongue and the horse moved forward. Dahlia instinctively tightened her grip, her arms now encircling Flynn's waist. She was acutely aware of his solid presence, the unfamiliar closeness to another person after so long keeping everyone at a distance. As they rode past the saloon, a man stumbled out onto the boardwalk, the same drunk who'd fired shots the previous day. He squinted at them in the bright sunlight, then made a warning sign when his bleary gaze fell on Dahlia. "Bringing doom to your ranch, Winters," he called out. "That woman's cursed." Flynn didn't slow Storm's pace. "Pay no mind to Eddie Jenkins," he said over his shoulder. "He sees doom in the bottom of every whiskey bottle." They rode out of town, following the creek that gave Redemption its name. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper, distant mountains sharp against the clear blue sky. After the tension of town, the open country felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater. "It's beautiful," Dahlia said softly. "Harsh but beautiful," Flynn agreed. "Like most things worth knowing in this life." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the rhythmic movement of the horse lulling Dahlia into a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. The sun was high overhead when Flynn pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley ahead. "Double W," he announced. "Named by my father, William Winters. Said 1W wasn't enough for a spread this size." There was a note of pride in his voice, tempered with something like grief. As they drew closer, Dahlia could see a substantial ranch house of weathered wood and stone, a large barn, bunkhouse, and several corrals. A windmill turned lazily above a water tank, and several cowboys worked with cattle in a distant pasture. "It's larger than I expected," she admitted. 15,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, 20 horses, and 8 hired hands who eat like 40, Flynn replied. "My father started with nothing but 100 acres and a dream, built it up over 30 years. And now it's yours," Dahlia observed. Flynn's shoulders stiffened slightly. "Mine and my brother's, though Daniel's been gone a year now." Dahlia remained silent, recognizing the edge of pain in his voice. They rode into the yard, where a middle-aged Mexican woman was hanging laundry on a line stretched between 2 posts. She paused in her work, shading her eyes as they approached. "Sophia, this is Miss Dahlia Summers," Flynn called out as he dismounted. "She's our new housekeeper." Sophia's dark eyes assessed Dahlia with frank curiosity as Flynn helped her down from the horse. Her legs felt strangely unsteady after the ride. "Welcome, Miss Summers," Sophia said, her accent slight but musical. "I am Sophia Mendez. I cook for the ranch and help with the cleaning when needed." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Mendez," Dahlia replied, grateful for the woman's neutral greeting. "Sophia is married to my foreman, Miguel," Flynn explained, retrieving Dahlia's carpetbag from the saddle. "They've been with the ranch since before I was born, and have watched this one grow from a boy who couldn't stay clean for 5 minutes to the man who runs everything," Sophia added with obvious affection. "Come, I will show you to your room while Mr. Flynn tends to storm." Dahlia followed Sophia into the ranch house, immediately struck by its unexpected comfort. The main room was spacious, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture softened by colorful woven blankets, and bookshelves lined with well-read volumes. Large windows let in ample light, and the wooden floors gleamed with care. "This will be your room," Sophia said, leading her down a hallway to a pleasant chamber at the back of the house. It was simply furnished with a bed, dresser, washstand, and small desk, but the quilt on the bed was beautifully made and wildflowers stood in a jar on the windowsill. "It's lovely," Dahlia said sincerely, setting her bag on the bed. Sophia nodded, pleased. "The bathroom is shared at the end of the hall. Mr. Flynn's room and study are on the other side of the house." She hesitated, then added carefully, "We heard in town about your arrival yesterday." Dahlia tensed. "I suppose everyone's warned Mr. Winters against hiring me." Sophia's expression softened. "People fear what they do not understand, but Mr. Flynn makes his own judgments." She smoothed her apron. "Lunch is at noon. I will leave you to settle in." Left alone, Dahlia unpacked her few possessions: 3 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small leather-bound journal, and her most precious possession, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of her parents. She placed it carefully in the top drawer of the dresser, unwilling to wear it openly where it might prompt questions. Through her window, she could see Flynn leading his horse to the barn, his movements easy and confident. He paused to speak with a tall cowboy, gesturing toward the house at one point. The cowboy glanced in her direction, his expression unreadable at this distance. Dahlia stepped back from the window, a familiar unease settling over her. How long before something went wrong here? How long before Flynn Winters regretted his decision to ignore the warnings? Yet as she washed her face and hands in the basin, preparing to face her first meal at the Double W, Dahlia allowed herself a small hope that perhaps, this time, things might be different. Lunch was served in the large kitchen at the back of the house, where a heavy oak table dominated the space. Flynn sat at its head, with Sophia bustling between the stove and table. 3 cowboys had come in from their morning work: Miguel Mendez, Sophia's husband and the ranch foreman, a weathered older man introduced as Pete, and a younger cowhand named Liam. Their conversation faltered briefly when Dahlia entered, but Flynn immediately stood and pulled out a chair for her. "Miss Summers, join us. Sophia's stew is renowned throughout the territory." The men nodded polite greetings, though Dahlia couldn't miss the curious glances they exchanged. Word traveled fast, even to remote ranches. "Miss Summers will be taking over as housekeeper," Flynn announced as Sophia placed a steaming bowl before each of them. She'll handle the household accounts, correspondence, and general upkeep of the main house. Mighty fine to have help for Sophia, Miguel said, his voice deep and accented. Too much work for one woman, especially with Roundup coming, Sophia snorted softly. I managed. At what cost? Flynn countered gently. You're up before dawn and asleep after midnight. Miss Summers's assistance is long overdue. The meal progressed with talk of cattle, water supplies, and an upcoming trip to sell some horses in Tucson. Dahlia ate quietly, observing the easy camaraderie among the men and Flynn's clear authority, worn lightly but unmistakable. After lunch, Flynn showed her the house more thoroughly, explaining her duties. Besides cleaning, she would manage household accounts, order supplies, and handle correspondence tasks that had apparently fallen by the wayside since his brother's death. Daniel was better with ledgers than I ever was, Flynn admitted as they stood in a small office cluttered with papers. Since he passed, I've let things pile up. How did he die? Dahlia asked, then immediately regretted her directness. I'm sorry, that was intrusive. Flynn's expression clouded. Hunting accident. His horse stepped in a gopher hole through him. He hit his head on a rock. The words were clipped as if each one caused pain. Been a year now, but some days it feels like yesterday. Dahlia nodded, understanding all too well how grief could remain raw long after others expected it to heal. I'll organize these first, she said, indicating the papers, grateful to change the subject. May I ask about my specific hours and duties? Flynn seemed equally relieved to return to practical matters. Breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Sundays are yours unless there's an emergency. As for duties, he gestured to the cluttered office, starting here would be a blessing. Beyond that, the house needs regular attention, but Sophia can guide you on what's most pressing. And my wages? Dahlia asked, determined to establish clear terms from the beginning. $20 a month plus room and board, Flynn replied without hesitation. Paid at month's end. Fair. It was more than fair, generous, even. Dahlia nodded, wondering again at his willingness to hire someone with her reputation. As if reading her thoughts, Flynn leaned against the desk, his expression serious. Miss Summers, I should warn you that not everyone at the Double W may be as open-minded as I try to be. The men hear the town gossip. They may be wary at first. I'm accustomed to wariness, Mr. Winters, Dahlia replied, meeting his gaze steadily. It usually progresses to fear and hostility once something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong. You truly believe you're cursed? His tone held genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Dahlia considered her answer carefully. I believe in patterns, Mr. Winters, and the pattern of my life suggests that misfortune follows me, whether or not I cause it. She straightened a stack of invoices on the desk. Which is why I want to be clear. If you ever feel my presence is detrimental to your ranch, I'll leave without complaint. Flynn studied her face for a long moment. Seems to me, Miss Summers, that someone who brings misfortune wouldn't be so concerned about warning others. Before Dahlia could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting men and the distressed bellowing of cattle. Flynn moved to the window, his expression sharpening. Damn it, he muttered. That new bull's broken through the fence again. He turned to Dahlia, already moving toward the door. Excuse me, duty calls. Through the window, Dahlia watched as Flynn ran to join his men corralling a massive longhorn bull that had indeed broken through a wooden fence. The animal pawed the ground, head lowered aggressively as the cowboys attempted to herd it back to its enclosure. Despite the danger, Flynn moved with confident authority, directing his men while staying just outside the bull's reach. It was only when the animal suddenly charged that Dahlia's breath caught in her throat. Flynn narrowly avoided the deadly horns, rolling away from the beast's path with surprising agility for a man his size. Minutes later, the bull was secured in a stronger pen and the men were repairing the broken fence. Flynn returned to the house, dusty but unhurt, to find Dahlia still standing by the window. Never a dull moment, he said with a wry smile. That bull's worth the trouble, but barely. You could have been killed, Dahlia observed quietly. Flynn shrugged. Risk comes with the territory. He glanced at the papers she'd begun organizing. I'll leave you to it then. Supper's at 6, but feel free to explore the house and grounds before then. After he left, Dahlia turned her attention to the chaotic office, grateful for a concrete task to occupy her mind. By late afternoon, she had sorted the papers into neat stacks: bills, correspondence, cattle records, and personal documents, and begun entering figures into the neglected ledger. The work was absorbing enough that she startled when Sophia appeared in the doorway to announce supper. "You have made progress," the older woman observed, surveying the now organized desk. "Mr. Flynn will be pleased." Supper was a lively affair with all 8 ranch hands present, plus Flynn, Sophia, and Dahlia. The long table barely accommodated them all, and the conversation flowed freely: stories of the day's work, jokes at each other's expense, and plans for the coming week. Dahlia remained quiet, overwhelmed by the boisterous atmosphere after so long keeping to herself. She noticed Flynn watching her occasionally from his place at the head of the table, his expression thoughtful. After the meal, as the hands dispersed to the bunkhouse or evening chores, Flynn invited Dahlia to join him on the porch. The evening was mild, with a crescent moon rising over the distant mountains. They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the night sounds: crickets, an occasional coyote call, the soft whicker of horses in the corral. "May I ask you something, Miss Summers?" Flynn finally said. "You may ask," Dahlia replied cautiously. "I may not answer," he smiled at that. "Fair enough. I'm wondering how a young woman ends up traveling alone from town to town, carrying a reputation for misfortune." Dahlia watched a bat dart across the darkening sky before responding. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. We lived in a small farming community in Missouri. The fever took 20 people, but some blamed me because I nursed my parents and didn't fall ill myself." She paused, the memories still sharp despite the passing years. "When the crops failed the following spring, whispers started. By harvest time, I was no longer welcome, so I left. At 16. Alone," Flynn's voice held a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "I had an aunt in Kansas who took me in," Dahlia continued, "but the pattern followed me. Her husband died in a mining accident 6 months after I arrived, then a neighbor's barn burned down, a child fell ill." She shrugged slightly. "Each time I moved on before I was asked to leave. And you've been moving ever since," Flynn finished for her. "For 6 years. Yes, never staying long enough to prove them wrong." Dahlia turned to look at him directly. "Mr. Winters, every time I've stayed, something has happened to confirm their suspicions. If not immediately, then eventually." Flynn leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Life is full of misfortune, Miss Summers. People get sick, accidents happen, crops fail. It's human nature to look for causes, for someone to blame." "You sound like you speak from experience," Dahlia observed. A shadow crossed his face. "After my brother died, there were rumors it wasn't an accident, that perhaps I wanted the ranch for myself." His jaw tightened. "Daniel and I disagreed on many things, but he was my brother. I loved him." Dahlia was startled by this revelation. "I'm sorry, that must have been painful on top of your loss." Flynn nodded once, his gaze distant. "People fear what they don't understand. Death, misfortune, change, they look for simple explanations, someone to point at." He glanced at her. "You became that person in your town. I became that person here, at least for some. Yet you stayed," Dahlia noted. "This is my home, my legacy. I wasn't about to abandon it because of ignorant rumors." His blue eyes held her steadily in the gathering dusk. "Perhaps you've been running so long, you've forgotten what it means to stand your ground." The words struck Dahlia with unexpected force. Had she been complicit in her own exile by accepting each new rejection as inevitable? "I should retire," she said abruptly, rising from her chair. "It's been a long day." Flynn stood as well, towering over her in the shadows of the porch. "Of course, sleep well, Miss Summers." As she walked to her room, Dahlia felt unsettled by their conversation. Flynn Winters seemed to see through the layers of isolation she'd built around herself, challenging assumptions she'd long accepted as truth. It was both frightening and strangely exhilarating. That night, she wrote in her journal for the first time in weeks. Redemption Creek, a fitting name for a place that feels both like all the others and somehow different. The ranch is beautiful, the work honest. Flynn Winters hired me despite the warnings, despite knowing my name. He carries his own burden of suspicion, yet stands firm on his land. Is that courage or stubbornness? And why does it make me wonder if I've been a coward all these years? She closed the journal without answering her own question, blew out her lamp, and fell into a dreamless sleep. The days settled into a rhythm at the Double W. Dahlia rose early, helped Sophia prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, then turned to her own duties cleaning, organizing, mending. She brought order to Flynn's chaotic office, updating ledgers and responding to correspondence that had languished for months. The Cowboys remained polite but distant, clearly reserving judgment. Only Miguel and Sophia treated her with genuine warmth, inviting her to share their midday meal when Flynn was away checking on distant parts of the ranch. "You are good for this house," Sophia told her on one such occasion, nearly 2 weeks after Dahlia's arrival. "Already it feels more like a home again." "The house was beautiful to begin with," Dahlia demurred. "I've merely tidied what was already here." Sophia exchanged a glance with Miguel. "Not just the cleaning, there is light again. Since Daniel died and Miss Rebecca left, Mr. Flynn has been like a ghost in his own home." "Rebecca?" Dahlia asked before she could stop herself. "Daniel's fiancée," Miguel explained, his weathered face solemn. "She returned to Boston after his death. She and Mr. Flynn, they were close friends once, but her grief, it was too much." Dahlia absorbed this new information about Flynn's past with an interest that surprised her. "He never mentioned her." "Some wounds heal slowly," Sophia said simply. That evening, Dahlia was arranging wildflowers in the main room when Flynn returned from a long day on the range. He paused in the doorway, taking in the changes she had made over the past week's clean curtains, polished furniture, books neatly arranged on shelves that had previously held a jumble of items. "The place looks different," he observed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, leaving it charmingly disheveled. "Good different, I hope," Dahlia replied, suddenly self-conscious about the domestic touches she'd added. "Very good," he assured her, "though I hardly recognize it." His gaze fell on the flowers. "Columbines, they were my mother's favorite. They grow near the creek," Dahlia said. "I gathered them this morning." Flynn moved closer, touching one delicate bloom with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his strong, work-roughened hands. "You've been here almost 2 weeks now," he said, changing the subject. "No disasters yet." Dahlia stiffened slightly. "There's still time." He looked up from the flowers, his eyes holding hers. "That wasn't a challenge, Miss Summers, merely an observation." "Dahlia," she said impulsively, "if we're to work together in this house, perhaps you should use my given name." A slow smile spread across his face. "Dahlia, then, and I'm Flynn to everyone except the hands who insist on Mr. Winters no matter how often I tell them otherwise." The use of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Old habits," she suggested, turning back to the flowers to hide her reaction. "Speaking of old habits," Flynn continued, "there's a social in town Saturday evening. Dancing, food, the usual attempt at civilization in the middle of nowhere." He hesitated, then added, "I thought you might like to attend, with me." Dahlia's hands stilled among the blooms. "I don't think that would be wise." "Because of the rumors," Flynn challenged gently. "Seems to me, hiding away only confirms people's suspicions. Or perhaps it spares them the discomfort of my presence," Dahlia countered. "You've been kind, Flynn, but the town was quite clear in their opinion of me. All the more reason to show them they're wrong." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell the scents of leather, horse, and sun-warmed skin that clung to him. "Unless you're afraid." The soft accusation struck its mark. Dahlia straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not afraid, I'm practical." Flynn's blue eyes glinted with something like challenge. "Prove it. Come to the social. Dance. Enjoy yourself for one evening." Put that way, how could she refuse without admitting the fear that had governed her life for years? "Very well," Dahlia conceded, "but don't say I didn't warn you." His smile was triumphant. "I'll bear full responsibility for any disasters that befall us." "That's not funny," she said, but found herself smiling nonetheless. Saturday arrived clear and hot, the kind of day that promised an equally warm evening. Dahlia spent longer than usual preparing for the social, washing her hair and letting it dry in the sun, before pinning it up in a style more elaborate than her usual practical braid. She put on her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white trim that had fared better than her others through years of travel. When she emerged from her room, Flynn was waiting in the main room, dressed in clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He'd clearly made an effort to tame his usually wind-blown hair, though a few strands still fell across his forehead. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said with such straightforward honesty that Dahlia felt herself blush. "Thank you," she replied, unused to compliments after so long being the woman others avoided. "You clean up quite well yourself." Flynn grinned, offering his arm. "Shall we shock the good people of Redemption Creek?" The social was held in the town hall, a sturdy building that served multiple purposes in the small community. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the crowd. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined the opposite wall. Their entrance caused a noticeable lull in conversation. Dahlia felt dozens of eyes turned toward them, heard the whispers start immediately. She resisted the urge to release Flynn's arm and flee. "Chin up," Flynn murmured, his hand covering hers where it rested on his sleeve. "You faced worse than a roomful of gossips." Before anyone else could approach, Sheriff Tate made his way through the crowd toward them. He was a tall, lean man with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard and observant eyes. "Winters," he greeted Flynn with a nod, then turned to Dahlia. "Miss Summers, welcome to our little gathering." "Sheriff," Dahlia acknowledged, surprised by his cordial tone. "Heard you've taken up at the W," Tate continued. "Sophia must be glad for the help." "She's been very welcoming," Dahlia replied carefully. The sheriff's shrewd eyes moved between them. "Well, enjoy yourselves. Mrs. Tate's apple pie is worth the trip alone." With a final nod, he moved away, but his brief interaction seemed to break the ice. Several of Flynn's business associates approached to exchange pleasantries, their wives offering cautious smiles to Dahlia. Not everyone was so welcoming Mrs. Tilden from the boarding house deliberately turned away when they passed, and the saloon owner watched them with open suspicion, but the outright hostility Dahlia had expected did not materialize. "See," Flynn said as he handed her a cup of punch. "Not a single disaster yet." "The night is young," Dahlia replied, but her tone was lighter than her words. When the band struck up a waltz, Flynn set aside their cups and held out his hand. "Dance with me," Dahlia hesitated. "It's been a long time since I danced." "Then it's past time you remembered how." His smile was gentle but determined. She placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor, acutely aware of the eyes following them. Flynn's hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, as he guided her into the steps of the waltz. "You move well for a cowboy," she observed as they turned smoothly among the other couples. "My mother insisted on lessons," Flynn admitted. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a bull in a china shop." "She was wise," Dahlia said, relaxing slightly as they continued to dance. Flynn's eyes crinkled with amusement. "She was formidable. You would have liked her." As the evening progressed, Dahlia found herself enjoying the music, the atmosphere, even the occasional conversation with townspeople brave enough to approach. Flynn stayed close, his protective presence both reassuring and increasingly distracting. She found herself noticing things she had carefully ignored before: the way his smile appeared more on one side than the other, the surprising grace of his movements, the way his eyes seemed to darken when they met hers. They were stepping outside for a breath of fresh air when the first raindrops fell, fat, heavy drops that quickly became a downpour. People rushed inside from the street, exclaiming over the sudden storm. "Rain," someone shouted. "First real rain in 2 months." Dahlia froze on the porch of the town hall, watching as the dusty street turned muddy under the deluge. A knot formed in her stomach. She knew what would come next. Sure enough, within moments, whispers began circulating through the crowd now packed inside the doorway. "It's her, the curse woman. She brings storms wherever she goes. Told you no good would come of her being here." Flynn's hand tightened on hers as he sensed her distress. "Ignore them," he said quietly, but the damage was done. The fragile acceptance of the evening shattered as people edged away. casting suspicious glances in Dahlia's direction. When a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the building, a woman near them made a warning sign. "Perhaps we should leave," Dahlia suggested, her voice tight with familiar disappointment. Flynn looked down at her, his expression troubled. "Running only confirms their suspicions. Staying makes it worse," she countered. "Please, Flynn." Something in her tone must have convinced him, for he nodded and led her toward the door. The rain had lessened somewhat, but they were still drenched by the time they reached their horses, tethered under an inadequate shelter beside the town hall. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the storm moving away to the east, occasional lightning still illuminating the landscape in brief, stark flashes. By the time they reached the Double W, their clothes were sodden and Dahlia was shivering despite the warm night. In the shelter of the porch, Flynn finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Dahlia, I shouldn't have insisted you come." She shook her head, water droplets flying from her loosened hair. "You couldn't have known it would rain." "No, but I knew how people might react to any change in circumstances while you were present." He ran a hand through his wet hair, frustration evident in the gesture. I thought if they saw you as I do, they might reconsider their foolish superstitions." "As you do." Dahlia echoed, something in his tone making her pulse quicken despite her discomfort. Flynn looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. "Yes," he said simply, "as someone worth knowing, someone who brings light rather than darkness." The words, spoken with such sincerity, broke through a barrier Dahlia hadn't realized she'd built. Tears mingled with rainwater on her cheeks. "No one has seen me that way in a very long time," she whispered. Without warning, Flynn closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Then they're blind," he said fiercely, before lowering his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when Dahlia responded, sliding her hands up to his shoulders, it deepened into something more urgent. His arms encircled her, pulling her against him despite their wet clothes, and for the first time in years, Dahlia allowed herself to simply feel the warmth of his body, the strength of his embrace, the surprising tenderness in his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing unevenly, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since you arrived," he admitted. "Even knowing what follows me?" Dahlia asked, unable to completely silence the voice of caution. Flynn pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "Especially knowing what follows you, your strength in the face of it. I admire that more than I can say." Before she could respond, the front door opened, revealing Sophia in a nightdress and shawl, a lamp in her hand. "Thank goodness you are back," she exclaimed. "The storm," she broke off, taking in their close embrace and wet clothing. "Ah, I see. I will make hot coffee." She retreated inside, leaving them alone again on the porch. Flynn smiled ruefully. Sophia has never mastered the art of knocking. Dahlia laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. "We should go in before we both catch cold." Flynn captured her hand as she moved toward the door. "Dahlia," he said seriously, "what happened tonight in town, it doesn't change anything for me. I hope it doesn't for you either." The sincerity in his eyes made her heart constrict with a bittersweet mixture of hope and fear. "I don't know what this is between us," she said honestly, "and I don't know if I can bear watching it turn to suspicion and fear when something goes wrong, as it inevitably will." "You're assuming much about my character," Flynn observed, his tone gentle but firm. "I make my own judgments, remember, and I've judged you worth knowing, worth." He hesitated, then finished simply, "worth everything." Inside, changed into dry clothes, they sat at the kitchen table while Sophia served them coffee and leftover apple pie. The housekeeper's dark eyes missed nothing, flickering between them with knowing warmth before she tactfully retired to her own quarters. "What happens now?" Dahlia asked when they were alone, cradling her coffee cup for comfort as much as warmth. Flynn considered her question seriously. "That depends on you. I know what I want, but I won't press you for something you're not ready to give." "And what do you want?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the diminishing patter of rain on the roof. His blue eyes held her steadily. "Everything. A future. A life built together." A smile touched his lips. "I'm a simple man with simple wants, Dahlia, but I know what matters." Dahlia looked down at her coffee, overwhelmed by emotions she'd kept carefully contained for so long. "I've spent years avoiding attachments, Flynn, protecting others from what follows me." She looked up at him. "I don't know if I can change that so quickly." "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," Flynn assured her. "Only that you consider the possibility that what you've been running from might not be what you thought." Later, lying in her bed listening to the last drops of rain on her window, Dahlia turned his words over in her mind. Could it be that simple? Could she simply stop running? Stop believing in the curse that had shaped her adult life? The question followed her into uneasy dreams where she ran through endless storms, Flynn always just beyond her reach. The aftermath of the social brought the change Dahlia had feared. When she rode into town the following week to collect mail and supplies, the reception was noticeably cooler than before. The general store owner watched her suspiciously as she selected items from her list. The postmistress handed over the ranch's mail with barely concealed reluctance. "That storm washed out Miller's cornfield," Dahlia overheard one woman telling another as she loaded supplies into the wagon Flynn had lent her. "First rain in months and it comes like a flood." "Tell me that's coincidence. Winters should know better," the other woman replied. "After all the tragedy that ranch has seen." Dahlia tightened the straps on the wagon with more force than necessary, her jaw clenched against the familiar pain of rejection. She had expected this, had warned Flynn it would happen, yet the disappointment cut just as deeply as it had the first time years ago. She was checking the harness on the horse when a voice called her name. Turning, she saw Sheriff Tate approaching, his expression troubled. "Miss Summers," he greeted her. "Heading back to the Double W?" "Yes, Sheriff," she replied cautiously. "Is there a problem?" Tate glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Thought you should know there's talk in town. After the storm, people are restless. Looking for someone to blame for damaged crops, flooded cellars. And I'm the convenient target," Dahlia finished for him, resignation heavy in her voice. The sheriff studied her face. "Superstitious nonsense, if you ask me, but folks around here can be stubborn in their beliefs." "I'm well aware," Dahlia said dryly. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff. I'll be careful." Tate nodded once. "Winters is well respected, but even he has his detractors since his brother died. Being associated with you, it complicates things for him." The words confirmed Dahlia's worst fears. Her presence wasn't just a problem for her own safety and peace of mind, it threatened Flynn's standing in the community, potentially even his business dealings. "I understand," she said quietly. The sheriff touched the brim of his hat. "Safe journey back to the ranch, Miss Summers." Dahlia drove the wagon out of town with a heavy heart, her mind racing. The pattern was repeating itself just as it had in every other place she'd tried to settle. First whispers, then open hostility, then what? In the past, she'd always left before finding out, sparing herself and others the escalation. Flynn was waiting when she returned, helping unload the supplies with the easy strength she'd come to admire. He noticed her subdued mood immediately. Town didn't go well. He asked as they carried packages into the kitchen. "About as expected," Dahlia replied, striving for a casual tone. The storm gave them new reasons to whisper. Flynn set down a sack of flour with unnecessary force. Damn their whispers. The rain was a blessing for the ranch. Our creek was running low. Not a blessing for everyone, Dahlia pointed out. Miller's corn was washed away, apparently. Miller's field floods every year because he refuses to install proper drainage, Flynn countered. That's stubbornness, not supernatural influence. Dahlia began unpacking coffee and sugar into their respective containers. Logic rarely prevails against fear, Flynn. You know that. He moved to stand behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. I know that running away won't solve anything, either. She turned to face him, her heart heavy. The sheriff made it clear that my presence is causing problems for you as well. Your reputation, your standing in the community, to hell with my standing, Flynn interrupted, his voice sharp with frustration. I've lived in this area all my life. I know these people. They'll whisper and point fingers, then find something new to gossip about next month. Unless something else happens, Dahlia said softly, something worse than rain. Flynn's expression softened as he took in the genuine concern in her eyes. Dahlia, he said gently, Bad things happen whether you're present or not. It's life, not a curse. You can't know that, she insisted. The pattern is that you've never stayed long enough to see it break, he countered. You've accepted their judgment without challenging it. His hands moved to cup her face. Stay, Dahlia, stay and prove them wrong, prove yourself wrong. The plea in his eyes was almost her undoing. How easy it would be to believe him, to stay in this place that had begun to feel like home, with this man who looked at her and saw possibility instead of peril. I need time, she said finally. Time to think. Flynn nodded, though disappointment flickered across his features. Of course. Take all the time you need. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead before releasing her. I'll be here. That night, Dahlia wrote in her journal, is it possible I've been wrong all these years? That the curse I've carried is nothing more than coincidence and human nature's need to assign blame. Flynn believes so, with a conviction that makes me want to believe it too. But what if he's wrong? What if I stay and something truly terrible happens, not just a storm, but illness, death, destruction? Could I live with myself, knowing I might have prevented it by leaving? Yet when I think of leaving the W, leaving Flynn, there's a pain in my chest that feels like tearing. For the first time in years, I've found a place that feels like it could be home, a person who sees me as whole rather than haunted. Is it selfish to want that? To risk others' well-being for my own happiness? She closed the journal without reaching a conclusion, her mind still churning with indecision. The following days passed in a strained quiet. Flynn respected her need for space, maintaining a polite distance that nonetheless felt like a physical ache to Dahlia. She performed her duties meticulously, finding comfort in the routine of caring for the house that had become dear to her. A week after the social, disaster struck. It began with one of the ranch hands falling ill, violent stomach pains, fever, weakness. By nightfall, 3 more men were showing similar symptoms, including Miguel. Sophia bustled between the bunkhouse and main house, her face drawn with worry as she prepared broths and medicinal teas. Doctor's been sent for, Flynn informed Dahlia grimly as they heated water in the kitchen. But it's a 2-day ride to fetch him from Junction City. Dahlia felt the familiar cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. What do you think it is? Could be food poisoning, could be something in the water, Flynn replied, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as frustration. Either way, we need to keep everyone hydrated and comfortable until the doctor arrives. Through the night, they worked side by side, tending to the sick men. Dahlia pushed aside her growing fear to focus on practical tasks, bathing fevered brows, helping the men drink small sips of broth, changing sweat-soaked bedding. By morning, 2 more hands had fallen ill, and Miguel's condition had worsened alarmingly. Sophia sat by her husband's side, her usually stoic face creased with fear as she prayed softly in Spanish. This is my fault, Dahlia whispered to Flynn as they stepped outside the bunkhouse for a moment's respite. The dawn light painted the landscape in soft gold, belying the crisis unfolding within. Flynn's exhausted face hardened. No, don't start that, Dahlia. This is illness, not supernatural intervention. You can't know that, she insisted, wrapping her arms around herself. The timing is unfortunate but not meaningful, Flynn cut her off. People get sick. It happens on ranches, in towns, everywhere. Before she could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching. A rider appeared on the road from Town Sheriff Tate, riding hard. Winters, he called as he dismounted. Got word you've got sickness here. Flynn nodded grimly. 7 men down now, we've sent for the doctor. Tate's weathered face was grave. It's not just your ranch, half the town's sick too. Started yesterday afternoon. Dahlia and Flynn exchanged startled looks. The town, Flynn repeated, the same symptoms. Fever, stomach pains, weakness, Tate confirmed. Mayor's wife is worst hit so far. Doc Harrison's treating folks in town, so he won't make it out here for a day or 2 at least. What's causing it? Dahlia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The sheriff shook his head. Not certain yet. Doc thinks it might be the water. There was a dead steer found upstream from where the town draws its water just after that big rain last week. Might have contaminated the supply. Relief flooded through Dahlia so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. The water, she repeated. Not a curse. Sheriff Tate's shrewd eyes assessed her. No, Miss Summers, not a curse, though plenty in town were quick to make that connection, I'm afraid. Of course they were, Flynn said bitterly. Easier than accepting that someone should have been checking the water source more regularly. I've brought some medicine the doc left for outlying homesteads, Tate said, retrieving a package from his saddlebag. Not much, but might help ease the symptoms until he can get here. As the day progressed, the medicine helped stabilize the sick men, though Miguel remained seriously ill. Dahlia worked alongside Sophia, both women drawing on reserves of strength they hadn't known they possessed. That evening, as Dahlia changed cold compresses on Miguel's forehead, the foreman opened his eyes, recognizing her for the first time in hours. "Miss Dahlia," he said weakly. "You are still here," she smiled gently, adjusting the blanket around him. "Of course I'm still here, Miguel. Where else would I be?" His fevered eyes held surprising clarity. "Many would run when sickness comes, especially one with your reputation." Dahlia stilled, understanding his meaning. "I couldn't leave when people need help," she said simply. Miguel's hand found hers, his grip weak but determined. "That is not the action of someone cursed. That is a blessing." Tears pricked at Dahlia's eyes as the foreman drifted back to sleep, his words echoing in her mind. She had been so certain the illness was further proof of her curse. Yet here was evidence to the contrary. The sickness had natural causes, affected the town as well as the ranch, and instead of bringing harm, she was helping to heal. Flynn found her later on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the velvet sky. He sat beside her, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Miguel's fever has broken," he told her. "Sophia thinks the worst has passed." "Thank God," Dahlia breathed. "And the others?" Improving, though slowly. The medicine helped. Flynn leaned back in his chair, his face softened by shadows and starlight. "You've been remarkable through all this, Dahlia." She turned to look at him, struck by the admiration in his voice. "I only did what needed doing." "No," Flynn shook his head. "You did more than that. You could have run when sickness struck. It would have confirmed everyone's suspicions, but you would have been safe from blame. Instead, you stayed. You helped. You put others before yourself." Dahlia considered his words, realizing their truth. For the first time in years, she had faced adversity without retreating. "Miguel said something similar," she admitted. "He called it a blessing, not a curse." Flynn reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "Smart man, Miguel. I've always thought so." A soft laugh escaped her, releasing some of the tension she'd carried for days. "I've been thinking," she said after a moment, "about patterns and how they can trap us." "What conclusion did you reach?" Flynn asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Dahlia took a deep breath. "That perhaps the pattern I've been seeing wasn't what I thought. Perhaps in running away each time something went wrong, I never gave myself a chance to see things improve. To see that life has both misfortune and joy, often side by side." Flynn's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying, I'd like to stay," Dahlia said softly, "if the offer still stands." In answer, Flynn pulled her to him, his kiss conveying everything words could not: relief, joy, promise. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "The offer definitely still stands," he murmured. "Though I should warn you, it's expanded somewhat since I first made it." Dahlia smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Oh, in what way?" Flynn's expression turned serious. "Dahlia Summers, I love you. I think I started falling for you the day you arrived in Redemption Creek, standing tall despite the whispers. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you care for this house like it's your own." He took both her hands in his. "I want you to stay, not just as my housekeeper, but as my wife. If you'll have me." The words hung in the night air between them, momentous and yet somehow inevitable, as if they had been traveling toward this moment from their first meeting. "Are you certain?" Dahlia asked, needing to hear it one more time. "The town, your reputation, to hell with all of that," Flynn interrupted fiercely. "You're my blessing, Dahlia. In every season, through whatever life brings us, the only curse would be losing you because of other people's ignorance." Tears spilled onto Dahlia's cheeks as years of loneliness and fear gave way to something she had never dared to hope for: acceptance, love, a future. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Flynn gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. They stayed that way for a long time, wrapped in starlight and newfound certainty. The illness that swept through Redemption Creek became known as the water fever after the cause was confirmed by Dr. Harrison. 5 people in town died, the elderly and very young, but the ranch hands recovered fully, including Miguel, whose resilience surprised even the doctor. News of Flynn and Dahlia's engagement spread quickly, meeting with reactions that ranged from genuine congratulations to poorly concealed disapproval. To Dahlia's surprise, Sheriff and Mrs. Tate were among the first to express their good wishes, Mrs. Tate going so far as to offer her assistance with wedding preparations. "People will talk," Mrs. Tate acknowledged when she visited the ranch to discuss details. "People always talk, but they'll settle down eventually, especially when they see you're here to stay." The wedding took place in October, when the aspens in the hills had turned to gold, and the air carried the first hint of the winter to come. They married in the small church in Redemption Creek, with Sophia and Miguel standing as witnesses. The congregation was sparse those who approved, or at least accepted, their union. Flynn wore a new black suit, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. Dahlia wore a gown of ivory silk that Sophia and Mrs. Tate had helped her make, with columbines from the creek woven into her hair. As they spoke their vows before the pastor and the small gathering, Dahlia felt a certainty she had never known before, not just in Flynn's love, but in her own worth, her own right to happiness. "I take you, Dahlia Summers, as my lawfully wedded wife," Flynn said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward. In plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live." When Dahlia repeated the same words, her voice clear and unwavering, she saw tears gleaming in Sophia's eyes, and even Miguel discreetly wiped at his weathered cheek. The small reception that followed at the Double W was a surprisingly joyful affair. Some townspeople who hadn't attended the ceremony appeared at the ranch, curiosity apparently overcoming superstition. By the end of the evening, even Mrs. Tilden from the boarding house had offered stiff congratulations, though she declined to stay long. That night, alone in the master bedroom that was now theirs, Flynn took Dahlia in his arms with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "No crying on our wedding night," he teased gently, brushing them away with his thumb. "Happy tears," Dahlia assured him. "I never thought I would have this: a home, a husband, acceptance." Flynn's eyes darkened with emotion. "You deserve all that and more, my love, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." Their kiss deepened into something more urgent, years of loneliness and longing giving way to the discovery of each other. In Flynn's arms, Dahlia found a sanctuary she had never dreamed possible, a place where she was not cursed or blessed, but simply loved for exactly who she was. The years that followed brought changes to the Double W Ranch. The business prospered under Flynn's management and Dahlia's careful accounting. The bunkhouse expanded to accommodate more hands as the herd grew. The ranch house, once so stark after Daniel's death, became truly a home filled with books, music, and eventually, children's laughter. Their first child, a daughter named Alina after Flynn's mother, arrived just over a year after their wedding. She had Flynn's blue eyes and Dahlia's determined spirit, toddling after the ranch hands from the moment she could walk and declaring at age 3 that she would run all the cows when she grew up. Their son, William, followed 2 years later, a quieter child with his mother's green eyes and a thoughtful nature that reminded Flynn of his brother Daniel. The rumors about Dahlia's curse gradually faded as seasons passed without unusual disaster befalling the ranch or town. Drought came, as it always did in the West, but affected the entire territory, not just Redemption Creek. A particularly harsh winter claimed some cattle, but so did every ranchers in the area. Occasionally, when misfortune struck a fire in the town livery, a flash flood that washed out the bridge to Junction City, Dahlia would catch whispers, see glances cast her way. But Flynn stood firm beside her, and increasingly, others did too. Sophia and Miguel, who became like grandparents to the children. Sheriff Tate, whose quiet respect carried weight in the community. Even Mrs. Tilden eventually conceded that perhaps she had been hasty in judgment. 5 years after their wedding, on the anniversary of the day they met, Flynn and Dahlia stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the land in shades of copper and gold. Their children played in the yard under Sophia's watchful eye, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Dahlia asked softly. "Marrying the cursed woman of Redemption Creek," Flynn smiled, pulling her close against his side. "Only that I didn't do it sooner." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "What about you? Any regrets about settling down with a stubborn cowboy who wouldn't take no for an answer?" Dahlia turned in his arms, her face alight with the contentment of a woman who has found her place in the world. "Not one," she said simply. "You were right, Flynn Winters. I'm not a curse, I never was." "No," Flynn agreed, his blue eyes warm with love as he gazed down at her. "You're my blessing, Dahlia, in every season, and I thank God for you every day." As darkness fell over the Double W Ranch, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Dahlia Summers Winters stood in the circle of her husband's arms, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life that had proven stronger than superstition, more enduring than fear. The whispers that had followed her for so long had finally been silenced, replaced by the steadfast certainty of love that would last all their days.